So yes, a quick introduction on Shrishtee. She's a member of, as well as a member of Global Tapestry of Alternatives, which she helps to coordinate. She also helps to coordinate a confluence of alternatives in India called Vikalp Sangam, that weaves together grassroots processes on alternatives, and is also a member of Kalpa Vrich, which is an environmental action group. Shrishtee, thank you so much for being with us, and please take it away.
Thank you, Eva, and thank you to Grassroots to Global Assemblies for organizing these series of dialogues. It's such an amazing conversations, and I'm looking forward to this one too, especially because these two processes that we will be talking about today, they have been such a big inspiration to many of us who are concerned about this, and they have offered us immense amount of hope to actually carry on with the work that we are engaged in. So really happy to be facilitating this conversation, and also welcoming, so straight away getting into the conversation and welcoming our two speakers today. I would like to first welcome Servin, and also just so welcome and thanks for joining us today. And before I introduce and welcome you to talk about what we're going to about the Rojava and the Kurdish women's movement and experience, just to set the tone of our today's conversation, because democracy and what it really means and how representative democracy within the whole framework of nation state has been going through whole crisis of legitimacy and co-option, and all the pro-capitalist perspectives and increasing fascist tendencies are today's reality. And with the whole COVID crisis, it has become so much more vivid and so much more explicit now. But there are also practices of radical democracy and direct democracy emerging from the ground, and they're challenging the state, and they're taking place in communities, in social movements, in lots of community processes. And they're offering us really important lessons to learn from. And that's what the today's conversations focus is, and we're really looking forward. So Servin, to introduce her, in her youth, she started to get organized in the whole anti-fascist youth and autonomous women groups in Germany. And the search for connecting political theory with the practice, communal life with the struggle for a free society led her to join the women's liberation struggle in Kurdistan and participate in the works of Genealogy Academy, which she will be speaking about. It's so inspiring. And since 2016, she has been working with women from Kurdistan, Syria, and other countries at the Genealogy Academy in Rojava, Western Kurdistan, and the region of Democratic Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria. The main focus of her work has been popular education programs, collective and communal researches about the historical and social foundations of women's revolution and system of democratic autonomy in Rojava, Northeast Syria. Further, she has been participating in the establishment of the works of Andrea Wolf Institute of Genealogy Academy and the aim to connect women's movement and struggle with democracy, justice, and freedom worldwide. So welcome, Servin. And the first question that we have been asking about is what is your work that you're related to, and what you've been doing, and what are your practices on radical democracy. So 5 to 7 minutes over to you, and yeah, we're looking forward to listening to you.
We slow down slightly.
Shrishtee, just a reminder from our interpreter that please go a bit slower.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, thanks a lot for the invitation and the introduction. And I also really liked the first part of the discussion in the morning, and actually there are many points that we can also relate to. But in first place, I want to greet you all very warmly from the Genealogy Academy in Rojava. here, on one hand, we are continuing to build up an alternative system of democratic autonomy, which is based on the pillars of radical democracy, ecology, and women's liberation. But on the other hand, also we are confronted with a war on many levels. So we have to fight at many fronts at the same time, against occupation and against patriarchal violence, against poverty, which has been caused by the long years of war, the embargo, and especially now with the rising of the dollar, with the US sanctions, so-called Caesar sanctions. We really see how the capitalist system tries to encycle this pressurous experiences that we made during the last 10 years. But so that it means like building up something, it means at the same time to resist against ongoing displacement, so-called policies of changing demographic changes, which we can actually call genocide policies. And the attacks and crimes of the Syrian regime, of ISIS, and especially of the Turkish army, and also of the imperialist powers against the people in this region and against the land, the natural resources are continuing. In this framework, the Genealogy Academy, together with the Rojava Revolution that started also together with the time of the People's Spring in 2011 onwards, has been, like the Genealogy Academy has been built up in this process and also contributed in some ways to developing the three pillars of this revolution. But at the same time, we have to see that it didn't start all in 2011. Like there has been the Kurdish liberation struggle has been organizing clandestinely under the regime of the Baath regime, and in spite of all the oppression since the early 80s. And especially also the works of Abdullah Öcalan, the founder of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, and his close relations with the society have been a very important resource of gaining self-confidence of the Kurdish people who were totally denied and neglected of all of their rights. So that we today have the possibility to have a school system which is based on the principle of mother language for the Kurdish people, as well as for the Assyrians, for the Arabic, for all the different nationalities that live in this area, has been the outcome of over 30 years of struggle. Like for us in the why something like an academy that calls itself Genealogy Academy has been founded here, and what we are concentrating on. I would like to share a bit about this. Genealogy, maybe you cannot find in a dictionary, like how you cannot Rojava find on an official map, you can also not find genealogy in an official dictionary. Genealogy means the science of women, life and society. Jin is the Kurdish expression for woman, but also has the same root with the word jin or jian, which means life. And it has been developed as an alternative social science in the context of the women's liberation struggle in Kurdistan. And Abdullah Öcalan, in one of his prison's writings under the name Sociology of Freedom, he discussed about the need to develop a science of women and society that can challenge the hegemonia or of positivist science that is used as we can say as a ideology of capitalism that creates a sort of truth that serves only those that that want to make the profits out of knowledge. Like why it has been so important to develop genealogy as a science of women is also closely related to the experiences that have been made in many revolutionary struggles and approaches. We see that in many of those revolutions or liberation struggles that claimed to free the society, women's liberation has always been postponed to after the revolution. This is a side issue. But in contrary to this, the Kurdish liberation movement and has for about 30 years now seen that the women's liberation struggle is really a very strategic issue. And actually we can say that autonomous women's organizing we can see as the foundation for radical democracy and changes in society. So it has been therefore, the women's movement in Kurdistan has organized itself in many fields, from local women's communes and councils to women's cooperatives, from women's academies to women's self-defense units. And like while starting this organization process, at first there was still the ruling system of the Ba'ath dictatorship, but or in the same way, although there's the dictatorship of Erdogan in North Kurdistan, or we have in East Kurdistan the Iranian state, oppression of the Iranian state, in South Kurdistan also Iraqi state oppression for years, but still under these circumstances of being confronted with different colonial powers, the people have been able to build up structures of self-governance, self-education, and also ways of regaining their knowledge and and connecting to the history of resistances that there were in history. So for in this context, on one hand, to having to resist against colonialism and all the different forms of oppression, the process of building up an alternative system within this, also with as a result of long years of organizing as an autonomous women's movement in this context. The works of genealogy started actually during the time when also the Rojava revolution started. And so if we want to build up a free life and free relations and a free society which does not reproduce power structures, we saw that we have to think and learn also in a different way, and that we have to connect the way or our aims to the way how we live. And for this purpose, genealogy has started to collect and connect knowledge, ancient knowledge that there is available in society about forms of natural health, of collective ways of living, of different forms of production, and like in the old area, we discovered that there's also a connecting point in between the different ethnic communities and religious groups that live here. So how the process was like by rediscovering the history, also to see what kind of structures can we build up to maintain this knowledge, to pass on the stories and songs that are like, there's a huge oral history also of women and the different peoples here, which all actually carry in itself wisdom and useful knowledge also about, can give an idea how to create different forms of relation that are not based on hierarchies, or what kind of struggles have been led in order to come to a point where it is actually possible, becomes possible for people to experience love and solidarity. Since, especially since 2017, we have been working together with women from all the different national and religious communities in northern Syria to establish local research centers. The first one was built up in Afrin, which is today occupied by the Turkish army and its mercenaries. But again, the people who were forced to leave Afrin under the circumstances of living in refugee camps in the region of Shehba, they have established opened another genealogy center there, and the works are continuing. Also in
Servin,
yeah,
we'll come to some of these details with other questions as well. So if you could conclude in say about a minute, and then we can come back to some of these important things again in next questions.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Yeah.
like the important thing, I guess, is that we saw that there's really a curiosity among many women and from all different communes to learn more about their own histories, which they have been disconnected from, and also to find answer to the challenge: what do we learn from this history in order to build up a future in freedom and dignity? And this is also something that has brought women together from all the different communities here.
Thanks a lot, Servin. And sorry to cut you in the middle. We'll come back to some of these things and also a little bit more on how the whole democratic structure is organized, which has some very interesting principles that all of us can learn from. So now we'll go to our next speaker, Gustavo Esteva. Gustavo is an elder and he's such a big inspiration for so many of us. To formally introduce him, he's an independent writer and a grassroots activist. Sorry, I have to be slow. An active voice within the deprofessionalized segment of the Southern intellectual community. He has been a key figure in founding several Mexican and Latin American and other international NGOs and coalitions. He is a prolific writer and has written some amazing stuff on cultural anthropology, philosophy, education. In Oaxaca, where he's based, he participates in activities of Centro de Encuentros y Dialogues Interculturales. I'm so sorry, Gustavo, if that is a horrible pronunciation. And Universidad de la Tierra in Oaxaca, which he's also a founding member of. So over to you, Gustavo, and the same question. Please describe your work and the radical democracy initiative that you're involved in 7 to 8 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Shrishtee. Thanks for inviting us to participate in this beautiful conversation. Yes, I am Gustavo Esteva. I, in fact, belong to Universidad de la Tierra, University of the Earth in Oaxaca in the south of Mexico. We are a group of indigenous and non-indigenous people learning by doing, and what we do is to participate, to accompany social movements, community transformation, community regeneration, and other processes of transformation, particularly women's movements. We, in fact, existed in connection with the Zapatistas before we existed. meaning the Zapatistas, as we all know, started in January 1st, 1994, and created a great impact in Oaxaca, in our indigenous peoples. And then after a few years of participating and joining the Zapatistas in their mobilization during the 90s, in 1997, the indigenous peoples of Oaxaca declared publicly, after 1 year of reflection and discussion in their assemblies, that the school was the main tool of the state to destroy the indigenous people. And they say basta to that. And they started to close the schools. You can imagine the scandal, the front page, these barbarians, they are dooming the poor children to ignorance. And with great success, they started to create learning spaces for the children in the communities. And then they came to us, with us, to ask what we will do for our young men and women to continue their studies after learning everything they can as children. And then we created with them and for them the University of the Earth, where we don't have teachers, we don't have students, we don't have curriculum. We learn together by doing what we want to do. And the most important things that we do is really to accompany social movements, to participate in social movements. And the most important social movements in which we participate is the Zapatistas. Within Unitierra, we have no hierarchy, there are no bosses. Every person participating full time can choose the activities that he or she prefers to do, that's what he can do joyfully, and then dedicate the time everyone wants to that activity. And we don't have a specific bosses for anything. We have rotating systems of coordination within Unitierra. And this is also something that we learned with the Zapatistas. The Zapatistas very soon started to be organized. They were an army, the Zapatista Army for National Liberation. But after 12 days of the uprising, they accepted a ceasefire imposed by the civil society, and they never again used their weapons, not even for self-defense. They have been continually attacked, they continually harassed by the government and paramilitary groups, but they have never again used their weapons. They have a very well-rooted organization in the communities. And after a few years of practice and organization in the communities, they created what they call boards of good government. They are people from the communities, coming from the communities on rotating basis. And sometimes in a board of good government, they have people coming from speaking 5 different indigenous languages, talking among themselves, and organizing a very, very horizontal system of government in which everybody participates and in which the people themselves can remove all the structures of government. They organize themselves in a way that allow everyone to participate, particularly the women. The women have been very prominent with the Zapatistas since the very first day and in all the public events. It is basically women that have been the speakers of the Zapatistas with the very famous Subcomandante Marcos. And there is a very important aspect in the way the Zapatistas operate that implies really learning to listen. They listen, as we will see, talking about the main principles of the Zapatistas. They are all the time listening to the people and following what the people ask them to do. In 2006, they did something that is particularly important to think in what radical democracy means, and it is very exceptional for an armed uprising, for a Zapatista army. They said in 2006, because we are an army, we have been trained, we operate, we have embodied one structure of command, a vertical structure. We are behaving, you cannot have democracy in an army. You need to follow instructions. And because we are shaped in this way, we are contaminating the communities. And then we will abandon the communities. We will be in the mountain just ready to protect the communities, to use our strength to protect the communities, but we will not be in the communities. And then the communities were left to their own horizontal structure, to their own capacities, to their own democratic capacities, to define by themselves what to do and how to do it. One very important point is that the Zapatistas started to have a dialogue with the state. They have the very famous agreements of San Andres after several conversations, very important negotiations with the government, and they signed the agreements and they fulfilled all the aspects of the agreements, but the government betrayed the agreements and did not follow it, what they were signed. Then after many several negotiations with the government, the Zapatistas refused to have any more dialogue or activities with the government, and they have been breaking all relations with the government. They never accepted any kind of funds or services from the government. They have their own way of learning, their own way of healing, their own system of their own way of life without any connection with the government. And since the last 15 years, they have no connections with the state. They cannot trust the state. They cannot believe in the state. And they believe but they are fully rooted, well localized in Chiapas with no connections with the state, but not isolated. This is localism that they are localized, but they are not closet in themselves. They are open to others like them, as we have seen in the last month when they are traveling to Europe to listen with other people in Europe. I think this is what I had to say, Shrishtee, in my...
Gracias, Gustavo. So, Servin, I think what is interesting and what is also already coming out of what both of you have just mentioned is some kind of broader learnings that are emerging from these initiatives that can be useful for us to understand and also possibly see it as some principles that all of us can learn from. So something also that you can maybe reflect upon is the imagination around or reflections around the whole idea of power within your communities, of how communities are thinking about it, and what are these general key principles that are emerging that you would like to share with us. So Servin, first you, and then Gustavo.
The important thing that we see is it's not enough just to have one organizational structure that is can fulfill all aspects of life, but that really, on one hand, the communes by themselves have a big knowledge actually about how to self-govern. But this has been oppressed for a long time through state. But we can see really that forms of people's councils, people's communes had maybe different names in ancient times, but this basic thing of if there's a problem in the village, to come together to discuss about it. If somebody needs help, like the solidarity that people show among each other, these social structures are really the basis, also in the sense of economy, having an economy where the harvest is brought together and in the end shared in a way that everybody can make the year until the next harvest comes in. These have been structures that of course are under the attack also of the capitalist system and were destroyed, interrupted through state land grabbing by the state or enforcing monocultural production in the region of Western Kurdistan here. But at the same time, there's this knowledge still available that it is possible to live and produce in a different way. And so, and we see that regaining ecology, bringing the communities together, and that the people themselves, and also regaining health, more healthy conditions of life, are very much interconnected with one another. So, but one very important point also with, we had in the morning also this question about how traditional structures, how democratic are they? Of course, also on the clans, on the tribes, there has been the impact of colonial forces, of patriarchy, of religion and feudal attitudes. But at the same time, we, in this context, establishing a system of autonomous women's organization, which means that women also in the communes are represented as a part of their own organization, are not just there as individuals, and having a system of co-chair, which means that in all parts of life, like from the communes to the councils, regional councils, and on in the schools, in the hospitals, like everywhere, we have now this principle of co-chair, we call it, or co-spokesperson. So on one hand, they are elected and they are recallable, but on the other hand, it's always a man and a woman that are collectively responsible. So in the beginning, it was a bit like this, that the man said, okay, I'm the chair and you are the co-chair, and women were perceived more in the way of being the assistant. But this then also with discussions in the women's movement was challenged, and more the understanding of, okay, the women's movement then also published its own women's laws on what are principles to respect the freedoms and rights of women. We know that freedom is not coming in place just with issuing a law or a paper where it's written on, but all these have become tools and mechanisms to improve the gender struggle and the struggle for democracy in the families as well as in the community as a whole. So it's a process of self-empowerment, and through this also empowering the society. I can give this as some of the examples.
That was beautiful, and I think a lot of that self to collective is so empowering, and is also so important. And usually, in many movements, that kind of process is not happening, where self is also empowered and enough space is given with regards to the collective. So, really, thank you for sharing.
Sorry, I just forget one small part that I think is very important.
Go ahead.
I mean, and also the organizing of the women's self-defense units, YPG, which became known with the resistance in Kobane when Daesh was defeated for the first time. This self-organization of women also in the aspect of self-defense, military self-defense, but also civil self-defense, in which all women from young women until old grandmothers that learned how to defend themselves, because they said, I don't want to be disarmed or without defense if Daesh comes and raids my home, or if the enemy attacks us. At least if I will lose my life, at least I will want to do it fighting, resisting. And so also this part of self-organizing has had a very big impact in society.
Yeah, that is actually one of the very important, and because both Zapatistas and Kurdish movement has had these self-defense units, I think that's an important conversation around the whole violence piece, and what does it really mean for communities to create that. And I think we can get onto that dialogue when we get into the discussion. So Gustavo, same question to you. What are these key principles that you would like to share emerging from the initiative? Any reflections on aspects like peace, power, and violence that I'm sure you would have engaged with in many years of their work? You are on mute, Gustavo.
I mean, for the Kurdish
So
movement,
when
there has been.
we get,
Sorry?
we're requesting Gustavo to reflect, and maybe you can come in later after Gustavo. Would that work?
Yeah, fine.
Sorry.
Okay,
Gustavo, over to you.
sorry. Yes, the first and most important principle that the Zapatistas got even before the uprising was listen while you walk. They knew how to listen. And as Comandante Tacho said once, to listen is not just to hear the other, but to be ready to be transformed by the other. And the most impressive thing about the Zapatistas is how they have transformed themselves and changed all their ways without betraying their basic principles, following their own way. Then after this listening to themselves, listening the original professional revolutionaries, listening to the communities, and then the Zapatistas listening to the civil society, listen to the people, listen to the communities. They adopted some structures of government in which the main principle is command by obeying. And this is absolutely real. They really have, yes, there is command, there is a system of coordination, there is a way to organize the collective activities, but this system of command operates by obeying, again by listening to the people. Is they doing what the people want them to do. They can be changed, they can be removed at any moment. They don't have any stability in the structure of power, and they change continually in a very, very creative and effective way, but they are basically based in the idea of obeying. I think that all this was associated with the principle that they follow with for the very beginning. The center of their concern is caring for life. Life is at the very center, the life of everyone, and of course, the life of Mother Earth. This has implied something that looks absolutely radical, is very radical, and for them is absolutely natural. They don't conceive the possession of Mother Earth. They don't talk about property or even possession. They are guardians of Mother Earth. They assume responsibility about Mother Earth. They assume what they need to follow to care for Mother Earth, to care for life. I will insist at this point that the change after March 8, 2020 has been very profound among the Zapatistas and in Unitierra, when the women broken the normalcy of patriarchal behavior. And they decided to really change our internal relations, the way about treating each other in a very profound way. In our conversations, in our study groups, we suddenly have one of the women telling one compañera, telling one of us, no, you can no longer talk to me like that. And we discover how we men used the still, we were very revolutionary, very radical, but still had embedded the patriarchal way of talking. And they are also telling us, you need to change your gaze. You are seeing me in a way that is not appropriate. And then we discover how we carry the patriarchal behavior in our bodies, in our hearts, and they are changing us every day, all the time, in a very beautiful way. And we are, of course, loving that change, really forcing us to abandon all the patriarchal behavior that has been with us for thousands of years, and that it is embedded in our behavior in many, many different ways. I would say that these are the main principles. And now today in Unitierra or with the Zapatistas, to be led by women, to follow the women, to be organized by the women is fantastic. It's really beautiful. It's a very radical change that you can really enjoy. We are organized today in a very different way because the women are taking the lead.
Thank you, Gustavo. It's really beautiful, and it's wonderful how both these processes are actually really challenging the patriarchal discourses and doing it so beautifully. And I think women, when women are leading the movement, they make it so much more beautiful and very, very different as compared to men. Wonderful. Coming towards the last question, so to say, one question that of course we can talk more about is the whole it's the whole about the violence and peace, which we can come to later, but also how can such approaches spread more widely, which is how can such examples re-emerge or emerge wherever we are, maybe not indigenous spaces. Some of us have lost those histories and connections. So how do they spread, and what are the lessons on how to build the trust between the communities and in the initiatives, how people have done here in your initiatives, and how can other people learn and do it? So maybe Gustavo, you can go first, and then Servin, you can come in and also reflect as you wanted to on the earlier question. Gustavo, over to you.
Yes, well, in Unitierra, we are very open. We have constantly people visiting us. And then we are also participating with the communities and with the social movements in all kind of media. We are not using conventional media, but we have in Oaxaca, we have contributed to create community radios and many other ways to relate with each other. And we have basically used the word of mouth. And then we are not disseminating Unitierra. We are not trying to create Unitierras. We remain small because we think that this is important to create the human possibility for a change. To apply really radical democracy, you need to have a notion of scale. But we are in contact with others, and in a very magical way, suddenly Unitierras have started to proliferate. First in the communities, then in other states of Mexico, like Chiapas or Puebla and other parts, and then in other countries. And now today there are Unitierras in Colombia, in California, in the US, in Toronto, in Canada, in Japan, in Tokyo, or in Catalonia, in Spain, in other parts of the world. Everyone is independent. Unitierra is not a brand, it's just an initiative, an idea, and the people multiply them. And the Zapatistas have had many other ways of sharing. Zapatismo is no longer in the hands of the Zapatistas. The Zapatistas have been inspiring others all the time. And recently, they have taken this fantastic initiative. They are right now, a small ship is crossing the ocean to visit the people in Europe. And if you see the list of people in Europe, in 30 countries, ready to host men, then you can see the connections of the Zapatistas with many other people like them that are challenging the dominant system. And then they are horizontally linking themselves to many other people. They are not teaching them, they are not preaching, they are not trying to create a world organization. They are going to Europe to listen and to have this horizontal interaction, a very effective way of coordinate the efforts without establishing structures of command. They are horizontally learning to each other, talking to each other, working together, organizing things together in a very new and very old form of structuring the relations between the people, between the peoples, between organizations, between people of different countries, different cultures. I think this is also a very important point for the interaction beyond your place when you are well rooted. It is the opening to intercultural dialogue. to learn to acknowledge the otherness of the other, and to be ready to talk with the other, to learn with the other, after recognizing, after full acknowledgement of the otherness of the other. Intercultural dialogue, it's also a secret that the Zapatistas have been very able to practice all the time, even in their what they call the intergalactic encounters that they have organized in Chiapas. There is one important point to conclude. It is when they created in the intergalactic encounter, they were invited to create one new international. They said, yes, let's create the International of Hope. Hope is one of the most important elements of the Zapatista contribution, bringing hope. In times of fear and despair, they are against fear and despair. You have hope. They are nourishing and inspiring hope.
Beautiful. So Servin, same question to you. Reflections. How can this approach spread more widely, and what are their lessons on how to build trust within the initiative and the community?
Actually, there are many points that I can connect to the things that Gustavo just said, because yeah, we are confronted with a deep crisis caused by capitalism and patriarchy that threatens life on Earth, and so at the same time, there's also a need and the search for alternatives that is a global issue, and we saw like especially with the concepts around democratic autonomy, democratic confederalism, women's liberation ideologies, concepts that were proposed by Abdullah Öcalan and have been discussed and implemented in the Kurdish liberation struggle during the last decades. That it is possible to, although there are oppressing states, although there's a world system that tries to commit big massacres and genocides, wants to wants to crush down this struggle, but with a clear aim of how to protect yourself, how to organize, you can also create the strength and the trust that it is possible to resist. And we saw this during the days of Kobane, for instance, where already Erdogan announced that Kobane has fallen, and nobody was expecting that it would be possible for fighters defending 2 streets of this town anymore to get out of it. But in the end, it was possible through international solidarity, through the strength of the people that stayed in the town and resisted, but also through the chamber around of solidarity that was created to break through this militarist mentality and attacks that nobody thought would be possible to break through. So, and there are many more examples, maybe of different struggles all over the world, but the important thing really is that you defend your principles and your dignity until the end. And if you have also this communication, and if the communes or the alternatives way of organizing that make the state less and less important and don't give them the power anymore to determine your lives, don't give them the right to take your resources. If you create this structures of self-defense in different parts of the world, and you can also build up new alternatives, you can at the same time support one another. Just an example, like not to be dependent anymore on the products and technologies of capitalism really opens up many new spaces. And so I think this is something that everybody, wherever in the world he or she is, can be a part of. And it's nothing just that is related, let's say, to a way of organizing that we maybe call political organizing, but also in the sector of health, in the sector of culture, in the field of education, in many parts, all your parts of life can be a part of, or a field of resistance against the system that tries to turn everything into money and accumulation of capital. So I think there are many important things that also can be exchanged between the Zapatistas and the Kurdish movement, and also with the different attempts in India and Africa that we listen to, or each like small spot on the map that shows that it is another world is possible, really creates new hope, and this hope is also the source of strength that will in the end be the foundation for something new growing out of it.
Yes, definitely. And we need a global worldviews dialogue among so many communities of doing such fantastic work, and to retain the hope. So we have half an hour left now, but we also want to have some decent enough time for people, because there's so many questions and comments in the chat. I don't know if you guys have the bandwidth to notice, but there's lots. So also to have some time for those questions. But before that, Ashish would like to have some comments, especially because he was facilitating the earlier session, and he's also co-facilitating this session from the background. So Ashish, over to you. Oh, sorry, Ashish Kothari is an activist based in India. He's a founding member of Kalpariksh. It's an environmental action group, and he's part of coordinating a process called Vikalp Sangam, Alternative Consequences, in India, and part of the global tapestry of alternatives too. Over to you, Ashish, and thanks.
Thanks, Shrishtee. Thanks, Servin and Gustavo. It's always a pleasure and inspiring to hear the two of you. And every time I hear you, I think I learned something new. So I wanted to maybe pick up on 2 or 3 points and add some perspectives to this, if I can. One is picking up on, I mean, actually, if you look at both the Zapatista and the Kurdish movements for autonomy and radical democracy, they have challenged not just challenged the nation states within which they exist, or in between which they exist, but actually, I think also challenged even the notion of the nation state. And this, I think, is really, really important, because we have, over the last couple of 100 years, got to believe that this nation state is like forever. And in fact, it's a very new concept in human history. Because of which we get this internationalism, national competitions. With economic globalization, you get the most hostile kinds of competition. You get vaccination apartheid. You get all of this happening where you say, okay, my nation is first. And of course, within my nation, the rich and the elite and the powerful are first. Now, what I think these two initiatives do is to actually say that we can live, in fact, we must live without nation states dividing us. If you look at South Asia as a clear example of what we've seen, partly because of colonial history, and this is true for Africa, Latin America, etc. also, we have divided South Asia, which is a ecological region which has lots and lots of ecological interconnections, cultural interconnections, language interconnections, but we've divided it into these nation state boundaries. For instance, the world's largest mangrove ecosystem, which fishing communities are completely dependent on, where there's tigers and all kinds of wildlife, is split in two between India and Bangladesh. The most incredible, the highest plateaus of the world, the Trans-Himalayan plateaus, are split between Ladakh in India and Tibet on the other side, which has been taken over by China. and so on and so forth. And what these divisions do is to actually break ecological flows and contiguities between rivers, mountain ranges, grasslands, etc., and communities who also used to go back and forth, nomadic communities or others. And I think it's really time. This has happened in some parts of the world, but I think we need to really look at this all across the world. How do we reimagine boundaries, political boundaries, to be much more respectful of ecologies and cultures rather than the historical accidents that many of them are. The second important, I think, point arising from these examples is that what I think we're seeing in Kurdish and the Zapatista example is that for a successful democracy, well, firstly, it's important to realize that I don't even think they necessarily call it democracy, and to look at what are the different terms, like, okay, if it's genealogy in the Kurdish area, the Zapatista probably have their own terms for local governance. And we heard in the morning from Simon, for instance, of the local governance systems in Kenya. Shrishtee, you spoke about local governance of a territory in central India. So I think there's like 4 or 5 crucial points that come out for a successful local governance. I'm still calling it democratic governance for lack of a convenient single other word. One, that people have the rights of participation. That is to say that my voice counts as much as yours in any decision making that is taking place in that collective, that community, that space. Second, that there need to be accessible forums for that participation to take place. So the village assemblies, the committees, the different forms that people take in their own thing. And these need to be face-to-face forums, first and foremost. Beyond that, you can have digital forums and things like that. But first and foremost is the face-to-face in that locality, which is where you build the trust, you build the dialogues, etc. The third is the capacity to participate. We know in India, for instance, that women have a reservation for 50% of the seats in the village councils, but they sit there and it's their husbands who are talking, because for hundreds of years, women have been told to basically just shut up and not speak. And so, how to building that and rebuilding that capacity to enable that meaningful participation, to exercise the right and use the forums. But the fourth element, I think, is the most important. And this also relates to some of the very enthusiastic discussion that's taking place in the chat on issues of diversity and how do you tackle differences, for instance, within communities. And maybe Servin can also tell us a little bit more about the fact that in the Kurdish area, the Kurdish are the majority, but you also have many, many other ethnic communities, and you're trying to make sure that they are also equally represented in decision, at least from my understanding, equally represented in decision making. You don't, just because you're a majority, you're not imposing yourself on the minority. So this fourth element to me is what I call wisdom or maturity. Is the democratic process mature or wise enough not to impose things like majoritarianism? Does it have the sense of responsibility towards all those who are marginalized, including other species, like Simon reminded us in the morning? And so if one builds that, then you build the possibilities of dialogue between people with very different points of view. And you respect the pluriversity of ideas, of ethnicities, of faiths, of whatever, while also collectively trying to move ahead. It's not easy. It's very, very difficult. Maybe Servin can tell us more about how they've dealt with it in the midst of a conflict area. So, so the last point here, and I'll turn it back to you, Shrishtee, is that I think one of the biggest mistakes we might also make is that in opposing the hegemony of mainstream development and capitalism and patriarchy and statism and so on and so forth, we should not make the mistake of saying, oh, Zapatista, fantastic, let's replicate that all over the world. Or Kurdish, amazing, let's replicate that all over the world. Or let's upscale that in some way. And so I think the idea that there's a pluriverse of approaches, very different approaches towards justice and sustainability and so on, is so very important. But then how does one build the common elements among them? What are these common elements? What are the values, the ethics, the principles, which is what Gustavo and Servin have so beautifully told us. That can become the threads of building collaborations, of building, like what we've said, a tapestry of alternatives, and then creating that critical mass for the macro change that we need. So I just wanted to add these 2-3 points of learning from also, especially what Gustavo and Servin have shared. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for summing it all up. But let's now open it up for everybody who's joined us. And there are lots of questions. And Justin and Eva have been helping us to take care of those questions. So Justin, over to you. We can possibly invite people to ask their questions, or we can just say them aloud. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to put a question to Servin from Nadia. Nadia was asking, she'd be interested to hear more about genealogy. Is women in life the same word in Kurdish or the same root? And how is genealogy different from positivist science? What does it study and how? And I wonder if you could link that also to the discussion in the chat around gender and just so how does gender play in this context, especially in relation to fluid gender too?
Okay, my computer is freezing from time to time, so I cannot follow all of it, but as I understood, it was the question about genealogy, if the root of the word jin is yeah. I mean jin, J-I-N, means woman, and jin with a long e, which would be like with a chapka in the Kurdish language, that means life, also jian. So also we have, it's similar actually in Farsi, where you have zan and zendegi. You can see that in many of the languages which have an ancient, are related to Neolithic times of agricultural revolution. You have a very close connection between the terms that are used for women and for life. The second part of the question I couldn't understand. Could you maybe repeat?
Oh, it was about what really is genealogy? Is it somehow opposed to positivist science, or what does it study, or is it not really a science? I would be interested to hear more about the academy, what you are doing.
Okay, so actually the critics of positive science have been one purpose for genealogy to appear, like the disconnection of the different branches of like splitting social science up into different branches at the same time, not like disconnecting or seeing just as scientific methods things that are valuable, that can be proved by making experiments or having like figures about it. We think that one genealogy is also to connect knowledge to connect spirituality, to see that there's a huge knowledge, wisdom within women that hasn't been written down, where you cannot prove the sources in where no written resources available. On the other hand, it is about not seeing or challenging the saying that science is neutral or without just fulfilling the aim of perceiving knowledge. Where if you want to know something, this has to have a purpose. So as genealogy, we define it as a science of women and society with the aim to obtain knowledge, to connect knowledge, to connect knowledge for the purpose of liberation of women and society. So to have to see which kinds information, knowledge do we need or is already available, that we can use to make our life more beautiful and to overcome the myth that made women, myth of religion, myth of yes, positivist science that make women feel they're less worthy, they're due to biological differences, less able to think, or whatever theories have been made also in the framework of positivist science that are based on sexist, racist ideology, actually. So to overcome these kinds of way, but like it's a process of organizing the collection, interpretation of knowledge in the communities. Here we have women's academies. We are working together with the women in the field of health. We have local research centers. So when there are problems in society, for instance, if there are problems happening in sense of violence against women, it's also about going and talking with the women to see what the reasons are, and the most important, how to get involved to overcome this, like to find a solution. So genealogy sees it as a science, not only as a task to find out about the reasons for problems that appear, but also how can we find a solution and solve and see and organize this as a collective process in the communes and together with the women that are active in the different parts of the women's movement.
Thanks.
I can also give the web page maybe for having more an insight.
Yeah, that will be great. If you can put in links and people can read those and maybe contact you if they want more information. Next question, Justin. Over to you.
We don't have that much more time, so I want to just, Tom Osher comes up with a question that I think is a challenge to Ashish as much as anybody else, which is, why don't you think horizontal governing, as in Rojava and Chiapas, is the perfect platform for communities to reinvent themselves autonomously? Why couldn't we take this as being a perfect platform for reinventing ourselves as communities? Maybe that's both for Ashish and for Gustavo.
Gustavo, you want to go first?
Okay. I would say that in the Zapatistas and us in Unitierra, we are still using the word democracy, but we are saying democracy means presence, not representation. And as she said, it is participation, full participation. Face-to-face forum is presence, not representation. For us to forget about the nation state was not so difficult because a third of the so-called Mexicans are no longer living in what we call it Mexico. And then we have seen the nation state vanishing. They are no longer the national government governing us. They are still using the police and the military to remind us that they are still there. But that does not mean governing us. We are governing by ourselves through presence, not representation. And about the capacity that Ashish mentioned, the capacity to participate, perhaps one of the most amazing things that we are seeing among the Zapatistas is the capacity of children to participate, to really take part in all the assemblies and all the activities with the voice for the children that they have organized in a very beautiful way. And yes, of course, the wisdom, because they are abandoning the majority. When the people ask in this beautiful conversation in the chat, how to process disagreements, the first thing I would say is patience. I once participated in one assembly that lasted for 2 years because they did not reach consensus, and they came Sunday after Sunday for 2 years until they accepted a common conviction that was the decision of the community. It's no longer talking about majority and minority. It is really talking about the whole community. And one important thing suggested by Ashish is what the Zapatistas are saying all the time is please don't imitate us. Please don't follow us. You cannot reproduce the Zapatista structure. Everyone in their own place, in their own way, in their own context, can do something different in the same line in which we are advancing, we are working. Perhaps that can be useful.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe just to add to that, I totally agree with what Gustavo was saying. And Tom, I'm not sure this what in what I said why you think that I don't think horizontal is the way to go. I absolutely think that, except we don't necessarily use the word horizontal. What we're basically saying is direct radical democracy, which is autonomy on the ground for units, communities, units of self-determination. And they could be in many different forms. It could be urban neighborhoods, it could be village communities, indigenous peoples, territories, etc. Actually, even in other institutions, in civil society organizations, in so-called schools and colleges and all, there needs to be way more of this kind of direct radical democracy. The only thing is that it's not, well, two additional points. One is that it's not, we still need, at least in many parts of the world, we still also need not the state, but institutions which enable larger landscape and seascape governance, which are emanating from these direct face-to-face direct democracy units. But they are, like, for instance, suppose the governance of a river valley or a river basin. And we have some very interesting examples, or at least experiments at that. Now, those are not top-down. They are not going to impose their power and view. They're basically meant for coordination, for exchange, etc., across the region. But in some way, these would be delegated institutions, because everybody across the whole region cannot meet all the time. So there would be either, we don't call them representative, but say delegated. And then the delegates are kind of constantly rotating, changing. And I think that's what happens also with the Zapatista, so that you don't have any concentration of power amongst any of those. And they can be organized along, as I said earlier, bioregional, cultural, ecological landscapes and seascapes, not in the current political boundaries. So yeah, Tom, everyone is autonomous is absolutely right. That's, I was saying that power is inherent in us, but there are processes of actually claiming that, because right now everyone is autonomous is a nice slogan. We know for a fact, if you see what's happening right now in India, that doesn't exist. People have to claim it. And that process of claiming itself is something that we've seen the Zapatista and the Kurdish go through over a long time of many years. And I think that's what we need to learn.
Gustavo, you want to add something?
Yes, a word about what Ashish just said. In the National Indian Congress, they adopted a principle. They say, we are an assembly when we are together, and we are a web when we are separated. Then they have this structure, this common structure, this horizontal structure for a bigger place at the local place. And then we have many structures of that kind. The Oaxaca Water Forum is people coming together, they are an assembly, they take decisions about the water in Oaxaca, about the whole basin, and then they can be separated, autonomous in their own communities to do the things. Just adding an example for what Ashish just said.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, Justin.
They're fantastic responses. Thank you so much. A great question to bring out really great responses. And part of this week is about how to reclaim our autonomy, or recognize that we're autonomous, stop being fooled that we're not. And how do we then come together in processes that can enable that to grow? I think you've been answering the question there, Gustavo, around how do you deal with deep disagreements, which sounds like patience and being together and coming back together is just, it's really hard work. It's fundamental work that you carry on. There's not some clever trick is what I'm hearing. But there's been a theme in the chat also around private property. So how do you relate to private property? I mean, in any of the three of you, really.
Servin is back.
Servin, yeah.
No, I just wanted a bit to comment on, it is not so easy also to organize really democratic structures. because you still have informal hierarchies that are very strong. So you have people that have a different social status than the other because he or she was born from a certain family, or you have differences in the possibilities that men, women, or like people with money had to go and see education. So there are still many hierarchies, also informal hierarchies, also in the communes and in all the structures. But the important thing is to have common principles and bases that on which you can also then hold accountable, and you have changing mechanisms of representation in different bodies. And also a mechanism of critics and self-critics, I think, is very important, like of reflection. And I just want to give one very recent example, one that of a struggle that we have here at the moment. What sound? Because like there's a very deep economic crisis at the moment due, as I already mentioned, the rising of the dollar, the or the closed borders, the embargo. So many prices are getting much higher, and also the Democratic Autonomy Administration, when they find ways to import, let's say, gas bottles for making food, they have to come from Iraq, but there are many taxes on the way until they come. So the prices get tripled because the dollar has tripled. And then is the question, who pays for these prices? And to this year we had didn't have any harvest because there was no rain. The water has been cut off by Turkey. So the farmers, the main population of farmers, is very poor, is suffering anyway. But on the other hand, how to find a gas cooker thing? And so there was a decision made by the Democratic Autonomy Council that like for North and East Syria, to higher the prices of the gas bottles, but because they had to import them for 3-4 higher prices. But the people said, we cannot pay for it because we don't have any harvest, any income this year anyway. So please reconsider this this decision. There were also some protests, there were critics, there were letters written, and after 3 days, the Council of the Democratic Administration, Northeastern Syria, declared, okay, we recall this decision because we see that it's that the people are against this, and we are here to benefit to the will of the people, or to put in place what the people request. So I think if we talk about trust and how to to find possibilities, how to solve the problems that we are confronted with, which are problems of life, and then it is very important to have the possibility also to consult and to get to collect different like to think more in the details and get together many opinions in order to have the possibilities to find alternatives, so that it's not only the questions the price that the region has to pay on a higher level to give it then away for a higher price, but how can we find different ways that ensure economic justice under the conditions that we have. And so now, with the Democratic Autonomy Administration, seeing that was a wrong decision, like also announcing this, taking it back, and they said that now again a discussion process would be started in the communes to get ideas, collect ideas how to solve this. And I think it's maybe small example, but a very crucial point for the situation here, which I think shows what is the difference between Western so-called democracy and the system that is trying to be built up, transformed here, because it's also not a stable structure. If it has been turned out that something is not functioning, not working, it can be changed within quite a short amount of time.
Sorry to cut you short, but there's so many questions and we were trying to cover them. But was possibly one more question, because there's just like 3 minutes to go. Or should we do the final round of last comments? One more question.
Well, there was just that theme about the financial situation and private property and the whole system that's built on the rich extracting from the rest and so on. Just whether Gustavo or Ashish would like to respond to that issue. How do we build these at the same time as dealing with all of that?
Well, apparently it's very difficult to abandon the idea of private property because we are very used to this very fundamental idea. But what I have seen with the Zapatistas and in many communities in Oaxaca is how absurd the notion is. Private property originally was created. The word private comes from depriving. And then if you deprive someone of something, then you have private property. But then if you are not depriving anyone of anything, you don't have something like private property. And then it is the natural thing is to live without private property. And people really enjoy living like that without this very notion embedded in all of us. You can abandon, and then you don't see, it is very easy to continue living without this notion in your mind, without assuming that you need to have to be in control of something and deprive someone of something.
Two quick examples to bolster what Gustavo just said. In central India, one of the villages, after a decade of internal discussions, declared that all the farmers of the village donated their private lands into the village commons. So there's not a single inch of private property in that village anymore. And they said this was essential for us to continue being sustained as a community and with the forests around us, etc. And the second one from a highly capitalist society is the Christiania settlement in Copenhagen in Denmark, a fairly large settlement, which for the last 40 years has lived without private property, without even inheritance, which means that I could be living in a house, but my children won't inherit that. It goes to the next person, next family in line who needs it. So it's possible, very difficult. I totally agree, Gustavo. It's so inbuilt into our minds and heads, but it is possible and would be one of the preconditions, I think, for a much more peaceful and egalitarian society.
Thank you. I think we've hit time, I've just realized. So Shrishtee, should we wrap up and thank 3 amazing speakers for an absolutely wonderful session and all the fantastic chat and questions as well. Absolutely brilliant and such a wonderful contribution to this week where we're trying to really grasp these issues and these feelings and these experiences, and you've done wonderfully for us and we hope we'll do wonderfully for you too. This should be 2 ways, always a network. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That was really amazing, and especially there's so much that one can learn, so much to still know and so much to be inspired with. Really thank you to Gustavo and Servin for such wisdom and such work that you're doing. It's beautiful. And thanks everybody for joining and patiently listening and keeping the chat and everything so alive. Thanks for your really lively presence here. And thank you to Grassroots to Global Assemblies for organizing these really fantastic talks and doing it in such beautifully collaborative manner. So thank you for all the work. And if anybody wants to stay on, can we stay on, or we have other
I think
sessions?
they have a session soon after.
Yeah.
But thanks to Tanya and Dita for the translation.
Oh, yeah. And my sincere apologies because I guess I was the fastest. Sorry.